At this period, England was in a very disturbed state. On the one hand, the king and those who took his side grievously oppressed the people. These words were written by the chronicler Henry of Huntingdon, bluntly describing the reign of King Stephen. Stephen's reign was famously said to be a time when Christ and his angels slept. But was Stephen really all that bad, or has history judged him too harshly? Well, the manner in which Stephen took the throne leaves him open to criticism. His cousin, the Empress Matilda, had been designated heir to the English crown by her father, Henry I, but had lost out when Stephen, himself a grandson of William the Conqueror, and therefore a nephew of Henry, had moved quickly to have himself crowned King of England on Henry's death at the end of 1135. While Stephen's usurpation was in principle wrong, it was not without some justification. He calculated that Matilda's support would be limited. In the 12th century, it would be generally expected for a man to rule. One key aspect of kingship was the ability to lead an army into battle. Could a woman be expected to do such a thing? Many, indeed enough, doubted it, and Stephen had notable family pedigree in military terms to back him up. His father, another Stephen, had been a crusader, albeit a disgraced one, who had abandoned the First Crusade only to be ordered to return by his wife, Stephen's mother, Adela. And as mentioned, the younger Stephen was a grandson of the mighty William the Conqueror. How, therefore, could Stephen himself not be a great warrior? For many, the choice was obvious. England must have a ruling king, not a queen, and so Stephen's plan succeeded. However, there were many who remained on the side of the Empress Matilda, including her uncle, the King of Scotland, David I, and Stephen's reign slowly but surely descended into civil war. Although Stephen was indeed a good and brave soldier, which he proved at Lincoln in 1141, where he was eventually defeated and captured, alone was not enough to establish a medieval king's authority. England had had many great warrior kings since the time of Alfred the Great and his successors Edward the Elder and Athelstan, up to the Norman conquest with William the Conqueror, and then the great Plantagenet kings Edward I, Edward III, and Henry V. These men all had more than just military prowess, however. They had the most forceful and resolute characters imaginable. William I, for example, had survived a perilous childhood in Normandy to seize the crown of England in 1066, like Stephen, as it happened, wrongly. Edward I remained on the warpath against the Scots until virtually his dying breath in 1307. These kings that I have just listed would have eradicated any threat to their kingdom, vanquished any foes. Stephen did not have that same character. He allowed the civil war to rumble on for the best part of 2 decades, struggling to control his enemies, particularly David I in the north in the early years, and eventually he capitulated, allowing Matilda's son, Henry, Duke of Normandy, to become his heir, and eventually King Henry II. But Stephen was not devoid of his good points. He was not a ruthless man, nor was he hard hearted. In 1152, he famously spared the life of a little boy named William Marshall, who had been in his custody. William's father, John, had been a nuisance to Stephen, and other kings certainly would have had the boy hanged to punish his father's misbehaviour. However, on seeing William, just 5 years old, ask to play with a soldier's javelin, the king smiled, and any thought of executing the boy was dismissed by Stephen. To us now, the thought of having a 5-year-old boy hanged is truly horrifying, but it must be kept in context of Stephen's time. The show of mercy to little William was a real insight into Stephen's character, one capable of genuine kindness. Stephen's leniency would have rewards for the English crown as William Marshall grew to be one of the greatest knights of the age. Conversely, it also perhaps explains Stephen's inability to destroy his enemies. But there is no escaping the fact that Stephen was, quite obviously, a terrible king. During his reign, the church fell into a dreadful state, full of corrupt clergymen who, quite literally in some cases, got away with murder. It was this issue that ultimately caused the rift between Henry II and Thomas Becket, with the first Plantagenet king desperate to undo the damage of Stephen's reign, but the Archbishop of Canterbury stubbornly refusing to allow Henry to interfere with the church. And during Stephen's reign, England had also become infested with foreign mercenaries, with many being brought to England by Stephen's wife, Matilda of Boulogne, as the king resorted to every possible tactic to cling on to his crown. On this issue of foreign mercenaries residing in England, Henry of Huntingdon wrote, "A crowd of fierce strangers who had flocked to England in bands to take service in the wars, and who were devoid of all bowels of mercy and feelings of humanity, were scattered among the people who were thus suffering. In all the castles, their sole business was to contrive the most outrageous outrages, and the employment of which all the powers of their malicious minds were bent, was to watch every opportunity of plundering the weak, to foment troubles, and cause bloodshed in every direction." Again, this would be another issue that Henry II would have to clean up after he had become king. Was Stephen all that bad as a man? No, he certainly was not. Was he all that bad as a king? Unfortunately, yes.